Hello, I am thrilled to be talking with you today about 5G cell phones and wireless radiation, what you need to know, what the science says. It seems every time we turn around, there's a commercial for 5G or for cell phones, and it all looks so glamorous and fabulous. But is there another side to the story? Now, I have two children, one in college and one in high school. And I got involved in this issue because I began to learn about the health issues related to cell phone use. And I have to tell you that I was completely shocked and really couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that there was this much science. And frankly, that there were other countries that were light years ahead of the United States in terms of protective policy around the issue of cell phones and wireless. So I got involved. I think that this is one of the most important public health and environmental issues that our world faces. And today I'm going to talk to you about how technology is marketed, what the science says about health effects, and what countries are doing to protect people and the environment. And I hope that this information will help you sort through the spin and advertising and help you make an educated decision about how you're going to use technology and what role you want to play in the development of technology so that it helps society rather than harms. When I was young, there was a smoking section on airplanes, and there was also a place where teachers could smoke in schools, even though the dangers of smoking had been well documented well before I was even born. Although we know now that smoking can lead to heart attacks and sudden death, here's an advertisement that told us to inhale to your heart's content. Smoking was marketing to pregnant women because it lowered birth weight. This reads, "Taste isn't the only reason I smoke. People are always telling me that smoking causes low birth weight. Talk about a win-win, an easy labor, a slim baby, and the full flavor of Winston."
Have they been proved to be safe, Mr. Coleman?
I believe they have not been proved to be unsafe, because when, as and if, any ingredient in cigarette smoke is identified as being injurious to human health, we are confident that we can eliminate that ingredient. It's true, the babies born from women who smoke are smaller, but they're just as healthy as the babies born from women who do not smoke.
What about the higher
And
rate
some
of
women
deaths?
would prefer having smaller babies.
Smoking was marketed to new mothers. Born gentle, reads this Philip Morris ad. And despite all the published science that had been accumulated, doctors recommended certain types of cigarettes.
Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
So I graduated college in 1994. And that year, the top executives of the 7 largest American tobacco companies testified in Congress that they did not believe cigarettes were addictive.
Let me begin my questioning on the matter of whether or not nicotine is addictive. Let me ask you first, and I'd like to just go down the row, whether each of you believes that nicotine is not addictive. I heard virtually all of you touch on it, and just yes or no. Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Mr. Johnston.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction. There is no intoxication.
We'll take that as a no, and again, time is short. If you could just, I think each of you believe nicotine is not addictive. We just would like to have this for the record.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive.
All right. Dr. Campbell, I assume that you're aware that your testimony, and you said in your testimony that nicotine is not addictive, is contradicted by an overwhelming number of authorities and associations.
The reason that scientists have been studying cell phones in health is because all cell phones emit a type of radiation called radio frequency. It's non-ionizing. That means it doesn't directly damage DNA like X-rays or atomic bomb radiation does, but it is a kind of radiation, meaning an energized field. It's invisible. You can't see it. You can't taste it, but it's very much there. And there are numerous studies that have linked long-term cell phone use to brain cancer, breast cancer, DNA damage, brain damage, and reproductive damage. This is Frank Clegg. He used to be Microsoft Canada president.
I've spent over 40 years in the technology industry. My most recent position was president of Microsoft Canada, and I've seen the tremendous benefit technology can provide. I've also seen the potential harm if technology is not used correctly. In my opinion, our current implementation of wireless technology is not safe, and I'm especially concerned with our plans for 5G. I don't make this statement lightly. I've met with experts from institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and the University of Toronto, and I've met with an expert advisor to the World Health Organization and one of the lead scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Prize. Over 250 scientists from 40 countries signed a formal appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations member states expressing their concern over the harmful effects of wireless technology, and added an additional appeal for the effects of 5G, especially the effects on children. Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies.
And yet the companies are advertising these devices to us as if they are completely safe. Just this month during the Super Bowl, there was an advertisement featuring music legend Dolly Parton and Miley Cyrus, and we were absolutely shocked.
When I see a problem, I am going to fix it. America's got a serious problem, so I'm going to get it off my chest. 5G phones, trapped on limited 5G networks. But you can make a difference. If you join T-Mobile, these phones will be able to shine their brightest, like me. I have my own theme park. T-Mobile, do it for the phones. Hey, Molly.
How can I help these phones?
You got a voice. Use it.
When we saw this ad, we immediately wrote Dolly Parton, Miley Cyrus, and the president and CEO of T-Mobile, asking for them to pull this commercial. And there are several reasons why we made this request. First, there are published case reports of young women who have developed unusual breast cancers directly underneath the skin where they place cell phones in their bra. And I'm going to play Dr. Deborah Davis. She's president of Environmental Health Trust, and she is presenting at the University of Melbourne.
We are seeing women who keep cell phones in their bras. Has anyone seen a woman put a cell phone in her bra? Hands up, please. Please tell them you've heard now why they shouldn't do that. And here I want to show you our first case report from 2009, and we now have many more. This was a Chinese-American woman who used her cell phone 4 hours a day in her bra for 10 years while she was driving. Now, and you drive with a phone on your body. The phone is smart. It's going to go from one tower to another, and it's going to say, here I am, where are you, here I am. And it's going to be going to max power each time it moves from one cell tower to another. And there it was right next to her chest. And the tumors that developed right under the antenna of the phone. This is an MRI of a young woman, a very brave young woman named Tiffany France. When she was 21, she's now 22, she developed metastatic breast cancer. This is metastases into her chest wall right here. And this outlined the phone. And it was subcutaneous, so it's like right under the surface of the skin. It was not deep within the breast. Most breast cancer occurs in women over 50. It occurs in the upper outer quadrant. These tumors occurred right under the antenna of the phone. And now we have 38 of them. Not a single one of them has a family history. None of them has inherited the defects that we know increase the risk of breast cancer. They have multifocal tumors. That means they have more than one tumor, and the tumors are located under the antenna.
2 years ago, a case control study was published in Cancer Management and Research, which found cell phone use significantly increased breast cancer risk, particularly in women who use cell phones close to their breasts. There's quite a large body of science that has accumulated, indicating that cell phones are not as safe as we might think they are.
In my daily practice, I'm seeing a growing population of ever younger cancer patients that, in my clinical judgment, more likely than not, have been caused by cell phone use. I've read enough of the science, seen enough of the published data, that when people walk into my office and I see their cell phones on their body, next to the head, talking, taking messages, and I know enough from my clinical experience that cell phone radiation is harmful, and my advice to them is keep the phone off the body.
And yet we are told that loving it is easy. That is why so many people do. Now take a look at this picture of this baby. Probably if you're in the grocery store, you will see many babies and toddlers and children with cell phones in their hands, clutched to their body, just like this picture. Except the way that phone is actually not how phones are ever tested. They are not tested in body contact to your torso or to your abdomen. The pre-market tests for cell phone radiation are outdated, and they're so outdated that they are from the time when people used to wear cell phones in holsters. There was a special little clip thing you'd wear on your belt, and you'd put the cell phone on it. It kept a distance between the phone and your body. In fact, all cell phones have clear instructions in their manuals to distance the phone from the body. That's because when the phone is placed in body contact, the radiation that actually penetrates into your body can be at levels that exceed government recommended limits. The Apple iPhone 13 says, iPhone is evaluated in positions that simulate uses against the head with no separation, and when worn or carried against the torso of the body with 5 millimeters separation. Now I need to clarify that when they say that they simulate uses against the head with no separation, there actually is a separation, and that's the ear. They do not actually test the phone in contact with the head. They test it with this spacer, which is representing the ear. And you may be looking at this and saying, well, 5 millimeters, what is that? Well, I am telling you that 5 millimeters is actually a lot when it comes to electromagnetic radiation. Now, in 2016, it was revealed that the government of France had actually been testing cell phones at body contact. They had been testing phones in positions where the phone was touching the body. And they found that the majority of phones that they tested violated the limits that were allowable in the European Union. Now, Professor Om Gandhi published a study that looked at the data from France and determined that our government limits in the United States would be violated up to 11 times. And you can go to PhoneGate to learn more about that. And I am on the board of the PhoneGate Association. Dr. Mark Arazi was a doctor who in France worked to pressure the government to release this information to the public because they did not want to release it. And at this point, PhoneGate has filed criminal complaints on numerous phones because they exceed the allowable limits for what cell phones can emit. In addition, over 24 phones have been software updated or pulled from the market to address excessive wireless radiation emissions from the phones. The Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 5G says Body-worn SAR testing has been carried out, and SAR testing, by the way, is the testing for the exposure to cell phone radiation. Body-worn SAR testing has been carried out at a separation distance of 1.5 centimeters. To meet RF exposure guidelines during body-worn operation, the device should be positioned at least this distance away from the body. And that is in the manual for the Samsung Gallery Z Fold 3 5G in the legal and regulatory section. Now, in the United States, in the cities of Berkeley and San Francisco, when there were laws proposed to inform people when you bought phones about these fine print warnings, the wireless industry sued, saying that it violated their free speech rights. And so far, no city has been able to implement the laws which they passed.
And atop it all, these are the world's first water-resistant foldable smartphones, scoring an IPX8 rating.
So they're not just beautiful, they're tough as well.
Z Fold 3 unfolds a better working, watching, and playing experience. Use it just once, and you'll know.
It's the same story for the Z Flip 3. Capture those shots, pop it in your pocket. It unfolds a new world of expression.
Fine print warnings do not protect you from the health effects that we're talking about in this presentation, because the government limits only protect us from heating effects. And there's research that has accumulated that shows a myriad of effects that happen at levels far, far lower than what government regulatory limits allow.
Oh, not quite what you thought of.
If you want to find the fine print warning on your phone and you have an Apple iPhone, you go to Settings, General, About, Legal, RF Exposure, and you can find the fine print warning on your phone. You can also go to Environmental Health Trust, where we have a page on the fine print warnings, and you can try to find your phone. We also have all kinds of wireless devices that, from routers to printers to Bluetooth speakers, and you can look up many of these devices. Now, in this talk, I'm going to be sharing with you several colorful images. And what they are computer simulations of the intensity of the cell phone radiation being absorbed into body tissue. So just to explain, there is a rainbow of colors, and the lightest colors are the most intense rate of absorption of cell phone radiation into body tissue, and the darker colors are less intense rates of absorption. So you have the yellow, orange, red, purple, blue colors. What you're seeing here is a simulation of a cell phone in a pants pocket. The Cleveland Clinic recommends to keep your cell phone as far away from the testes as you can. That's a highly regarded medical institution in the United States that has done a lot of research on fertility and reproduction. And there have been extensive research studies, both in people, in animals, that have looked at what happens when sperm is exposed to cell phone radiation. Just last year, there were 3 systematic reviews that found radiofrequency radiation can harm sperm. There was also a systematic review done that looked at male reproductive hormones and found that wireless can decrease testosterone. And yet there are numerous advertisements that show a cell phone in the pocket.
Having some fun while you out on your run, taking victory laps. I'm in the hood with them ones. Catch me out in the cave. Who you know I'm face? I see them keep trying, professional imitate. They hear that loud ooh, chitty chitty bang, chitty chitty bang, chitty chitty bang.
This ad not only has a cell phone in the pocket, but it has a baby, a child. And when companies want to make something seem safe, they often put a baby in it, or sometimes actually they put dogs and cats and kittens and bunnies, but babies and children are just all over advertisements for cell phones and wireless devices, despite the fact that research has shown children are more vulnerable to wireless radiation. They are more vulnerable to cell phone radiation just as they are to other environmental toxins. This is a study that looked at the simulation of microwave radiation into child and adult models, and they found that the younger age models simulations absorb proportionately more radiation into the eyes and brain, into the cerebellum and hippocampus. And in the younger model, up to 30-fold times the rate of absorption into the hippocampus, and into the eyes, 2 to 5 times higher. The radiation penetrates into children's brains and bodies more deeply than adults. They have thinner skulls. They also have a higher water content in their bodies and brain. And of course, their brains are more susceptible to neurotoxins because they're still developing. Children also have more active stem cells, and stem cells have been found to be more sensitive to radiofrequency radiation. The safety limits that we have for cell phones and wireless devices are outdated. They have not changed in decades, and they're based on the body of a large adult, not a child. Just like with all of the other environmental exposures, our regulatory system does not really think about kids and how they are unique. Their brains are still developing. And of course, children will have a lifetime of exposure compared to adults.
Well, what do we do to learn something new? We look it up! Searching for babies.
Oh, thank you for your help, Smarty.
Aww!
What you're seeing here is the specific absorption rate from Wi-Fi coming out of a tablet into the head of a 6-year-old. And these are simulations of a Wi-Fi laptop on the lap and the way the wave moves out from the antennas and is absorbed into the body. And it is slowed down by billions of times, by the way, so that you can sort of see how the wave moves. And yet here's a commercial from AT&T talking about how even though you can't be with your kids or grandkids in person, you can still be a part of the important moments like story time with these various applications. And let me say, I am not against technology. I'm not against kids connecting with their grandparents or with their parents, but there are safer ways to use devices. For example, this little girl is very close to the device. The device should be on a table. In addition, it could be hardwired with an Ethernet cord so that it wasn't emitting radiation. But I don't believe that the parents or perhaps anyone involved in the production of this commercial even has any idea about that there even is radiation, much less that there's a way to reduce exposure. But instead of informing us how to make a safe Ethernet connection, we see commercials that say it's all about the connections you make with laptops on laps. And of course, children are using wireless devices in schools on the lap. Probably in college, you are sitting on your dorm bed with a device on your lap. And in most dorm rooms, there's actually an Ethernet port, and you could plug your Ethernet into that port and then the other end into your computer and actually have a wired radiation-free laptop. Now, if you decide to look this up, you'll probably read that, well, it's non-ionizing. There is no way it can cause harm because it doesn't directly damage DNA. But please be aware of Dr. Henry Lai's review from last year, which looked at the genetic effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields and documented DNA strand breaks, micronucleus formation, and chromosomal structural changes, and other research studies which are showing an association with genetic damage. And then, of course, there's the brain and impacts from prenatal exposure or impacts to the young developing brain. What could those impacts be? Scientists have tried to answer that question. Here's Dr. Hugh Taylor talking about the research he did on mice, where he exposed them to cell phone radiation and found that they had damaged memory and increased hyperactivity.
So this is a study that really looked at only the effect of prenatal exposure to cell phone radiation. What effect does having a cell phone near your baby when you're pregnant have on that baby later on in life when that baby's grown up? We tested these mice when they reached adulthood and looked at the lasting effect of that early prenatal cell phone exposure. The mice who were exposed to cell phones were more hyperactive. They were running around the cage a lot more aggressively. They had poorer memory. They couldn't remember objects in the cage as well as their counterparts who weren't exposed to the cell phone radiation. But they did not have any increased anxiety, as sometimes running around can be a sign of anxiety. It was not that. They were calm and relaxed. So they were running around these cages, bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world. Something that, in our eyes, resembles attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. That was the closest model we can think of to the behavioral effects that we saw in the mice.
I was aware of research earlier. Prenatally exposed rats develop smaller brains with more brain damage.
Mothers who spent a lot of time on the cell phone, carried a cell phone with them during their pregnancies, had a higher risk of having children with behavioral problems. And I think when you have clear cause and effect relationship in mice and an association in women, that women who use these cell phones had children with more behavioral problems, I think that's together very powerful evidence saying that this is truly a cause and effect in humans as well. The mouse studies prove that it's really causative, that the cell phones are causing it. It's not just because of some other behaviors linked to cell phones in women.
This is an advertisement for a device that helps with cybersecurity. It says your smart home's immune system. And there you have the dad with the two cute kids surrounding the device, but no information about how that device is emitting radiation, which is absorbed into the bodies of whoever is near the device. Now, there is a lot of research, and there's no way I could cover it in this presentation, but I wanted to hit a few key studies. There is research that has shown damage to memory. Teenagers who used cell phones to one side of their head after 1 year had damage to memory, and they did tests specifically aimed at looking at the brain workings in the area most exposed to the cell phone. There's experimental research that found a variety of adverse effects, especially in brain regions critical to memory and learning, the hippocampus. Damaged brain cells, decreased brain cells, the iPhone 6, ridiculously powerful. Now, there have been numerous studies associating cell phone use with headaches. And this year, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis of cell phone radiation and risk of headache. It was published in the International Archives of Occupational and Environmental Health, and they found that increasing call duration and mobile phone use in older individuals increased the risk of headaches. There was a study published in Environmental Analysis, Health and Toxicology looking at high school students, and they completed a headache diary, and they found correlations to migraine headaches. They conclude that smartphone electromagnetic radiation is a new trigger of migraine. And yet commercials tell us there will be laughter, smiles, and connection. It's not just cell phones that have fine print warnings. There was another Super Bowl commercial, and it had Jim Carrey putting his head to the new 5G router.
Whoa! They must have locked you into quite a contract.
Nope.
Hidden fees?
I love those. Nope. Price is the price.
This may be illegal, and you could spend time in a correctional facility.
Putting your head right up to a 5G router could be considered illegal because it violates the instructions in the user manual. If you go to the Verizon 5G Internet Gateway that he put his head to, and you go into the user manual, into the legal section, it actually says that the device has been tested and meets limits for radio frequency exposure. This equipment should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. And our next step is going to be to write Verizon about this commercial and Jim Carrey and ask them to inform consumers, inform the public, inform all the watchers of that advertisement that actually you are not supposed to put your head to the router. The Amazon Echo Dot Kids also has a 20 centimeter fine print warning. This device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. And yet kids are advertised these, and we have many videos of kids putting their heads and bodies right up to these devices. Amazon Echo, 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. Some are sleeping with Alexa in their bedrooms. Amazon Echo Studio Smart Speaker. This device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. Even Apple Watches emit radio frequency radiation, and their fine print warning reads, when placing Apple Watch near your face, keep at least 10 millimeters of separation to ensure exposure levels remain at or below at tested levels. And I think about all the young children who have these watches and who just sit and their head is right on that watch, or maybe they sleep with it. Gaming devices as well. This equipment should be installed and operated with at least 20 centimeters or more between the radiator and a person's body. And yet people aren't informed about this. In fact, the gaming console bases emit all the time, whether you're using the device or not. And I went to a friend's home, and her son had 3 or 4 of these gaming consoles in the bedroom. They were, I kid you not, right up against the bed. And there he was sleeping in that all night long, completely not unaware that he was absorbing the radiation from those devices. And they really weren't supposed to be that close to his body, according to the manufacturer's instructions themselves. Now, what about the issue of cancer? Everyone asks. In 2011, the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified radiofrequency radiation as a group 2B possible carcinogen. And that was largely based on human studies that found long-term cell phone users, people that use cell phones for many hours a day and for many years, had increased risk for tumors. 2 types, glioblastomas and acoustic neuromas. And I'm going to play you a clip of Brett Bocock talking about the cancer he developed after heavy cell phone use.
I got an anaplastic glioma, an anaplastic astrocytoma. This is my brain on a cell phone. Okay, so you can see there's a baseball-sized tumor, and right here, right exactly where the antenna goes. Passed out in the shower. This is 5 years ago, and my heart had stopped. My wife was pregnant, 8.5 months at that time. We lost the baby. She found me in the shower sick, and I had 2 near-death experiences where I actually died a couple of times for a matter of several minutes before my heart started beating again, and we know that for sure because I was even hooked up to an EKG at one point. And so this has been a series of problems we've had that's impacted our lives severely. And you can see now my mobility and my ability to even function in society is greatly diminished, although I am still mentally sharp. I've used a cell phone to the best of my computation ability about 1 million minutes, which you'd be surprised how fast that can accumulate when you're in business and you're single, dating women and doing business. Okay? Used to be an athlete and very focused on health.
So that was a decade ago. And at the time, the WHO scientists didn't have enough research on animals to really confirm that the association they saw in people was really causation. So scientists will take animals and do carefully controlled laboratory studies, experimental studies, to see if what they saw in humans is happening in animals. And as I'm going to talk about, they found that in large scale animal studies, there was the exact same tumor types in the animals, in the rats, as were found in the people. The United States put $30 million into a large scale animal study, and they found clear evidence of tumors in the hearts of male rats. The brains of male rats had some evidence, what was termed some evidence of tumors. It was malignant gliomas. And they also found tumors in the adrenal glands in certain groups of male rats. In addition, with some animals that they sacrificed early on in the study, because this was a 2-year study, and they took some animals out under 20 weeks, and they found DNA damage in male mice, female mice, and male rats. Now, what this study showed is that there was an impact from what would be considered low-level cell phone radiation. Now, if you go online and read about this, there's all kinds of criticisms of the National Toxicology Program, but it really was designed to find out if the levels of cell phone radiation were non-heating, would there be an effect? And if there is an effect from this study, it means that everything we think about cell phone radiation, that, well, it's non-ionizing, so it can't harm us, that just gets turned upside down. And here's Dr. Ronald Melnick talking about the study findings and his recommendations.
What does the public need to know? There have been multiple studies have found increases in cancer associated with exposure to radiofrequency radiation. This is animals and humans. Because of the widespread use of cell phones, even a small increase in cancer risk would have a serious public health impact. I strongly feel precautionary principles should be promoted by health and regulatory agencies, especially for children and pregnant women. The agencies in the US say, if you are concerned. That puts the burden on the individual. It doesn't say, we are concerned. It should be very straightforward. Precautionary principles should be promoted because, as mentioned earlier, risk can be greater for children than adults due to the increased penetration of the radiation within brains of children, and the developing nervous system is more susceptible to tissue-damaging agents. So finally, what is the lesson that should be learned? When dealing with assumptions, I think we've shown that assumptions in this case can be wrong, so that we should no longer assume that any current or future wireless technology, including 5G, is safe without adequate testing. Thank you.
And so now many scientists say that the weight of current peer-reviewed evidence supports the conclusion that radiofrequency radiation should be regarded as a human carcinogen.
The combined evidence, in my view, is that there is now sufficient evidence that radiofrequency radiation is carcinogenic to humans. That's IR category 1, and you can't ignore that. And the implications of this, we have to be cautious. Radiofrequency radiation is now ubiquitous. We're probably exposed to it in this room, even though we do not want to be. And we know that although the risk per individual is low, the radiation is widely distributed. I was astounded when I went up one of your peaks to find a cell tower at the top of the tram. My goodness, what are they doing to people? And when we continue doing this, this could result in major public health problems.
In the 1930s, they said asbestos was safe. In the 1950s, they said tobacco was safe. In the 1960s, they said DDT was safe. From the 2000s, they say cell phones are safe. Today, they say 5G is safe.
So how did we get here? Of course, money. It's always money. There is a report by Harvard called Captured Agency, How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industry it presumably regulates. And Norm Alster is the writer, and he investigates how there is so much money from the industry, that there's money into Congress, there's money into the agencies that are supposedly protecting us. So in the United States, it is the Federal Communications Commission that has the authority in regards to regulations for wireless radiation. And the FCC has many former industry lobbyists or industry lawyers in its leadership. Norm Alster talks about how the wireless companies are using the playbook of big tobacco. And he talks about also how research is funded by industry. Really important. This was now published in 2015, and he concludes, consumer safety, health, and privacy, along with consumer wallets, have all been overlooked, sacrificed, or raided due to unchecked industry influence. The wireless industry has been funding research on health effects for years. Here's Jerry Phillips talking about his research with Motorola.
I moved to California, Southern California. The 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers. I said, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swicord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRA, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude. That was it. I think one has to exercise caution at this point, and what makes...
Our piece is an investigative expose showing you how the cellular industry has worked for 25 years behind the scenes to convince you that cell phones are safe, when in fact, if you look at the independently funded science, the picture is a lot more mixed than that. And as you mentioned, there's that smoking gun memo, letter I should say, from George Carlo in 1999 telling the CEOs of all these big companies, look, this stuff is raising serious questions, especially about kids and cancer and genetic damage. And I think that's the real parallel with both big oil and big tobacco. In each case, these big companies were told privately by their own scientists that there's serious questions about your product, whether it be cigarettes or fossil fuels or cell phones. And in each case, those executives decided not to share that with the public, but rather to keep that information to themselves while telling the public and telling the press and telling policymakers there's no problem. There is a lot of evidence suggesting that we need to be a lot more careful about these cell phones.
And this is a little clip from Verizon's Total Mobile Protection Insurance, where they define non-ionizing radiation, specifically microwave radiation, like from cell phones, as a pollution. This is an advertisement for a cell phone booster. We boost your productivity. The companies warn their shareholders of the risk of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields. Here's an example of Vodafone's annual report 2020, where they have figure 2, our principal risks and interdependencies, and they have electromagnetic fields right there next to the health pandemic, Brexit, and climate change. If you go to page 68, it says the EMF risk can be broken into 3 areas: failure to comply with national legislation or international guidelines set by ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, as it applies to EMF, or a failure to meet policy requirements, the risk arising from concerted campaigns or negative community sentiment towards the location or installation of radio base station antennas resulting in planning delays, or changes in the radio technology we use or the body of credible scientific evidence which may impact either of the 2 risks above. Changes in the body of scientific evidence which may impact the 2 risks above. Wireless companies warn their shareholders of risk, but not their customers or residents. Crown Castle, that's a company that's putting up short cell towers in the United States. They say in their annual report, if frequency emissions from wireless handsets or equipment on our communications infrastructure, meaning cell towers, are demonstrated to cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations, costs, or revenues. We currently do not maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters. Now, they don't have insurance because insurance companies will not cover this issue because it is deemed a high risk, comparable to asbestos. Insurance companies rate cell phone radiation, wireless, and 5G as high risk. There are many white papers on that. Verizon Wireless says we may incur significant expenses in defending these lawsuits. In addition, we may be required to pay significant awards or settlements, and that's in their 10K. And yet, the commercials tell us that we can experience a Wi-Fi peace of mind. We should have peace of mind. But they tell the shareholders about the potential risk, but not us. They tell us that we can control everything. Over 20 governments recommend reducing cell phone radiation, especially to children. And all of the countries that you see here have posted recommendations that say you should reduce exposure to children, or you should reduce exposure to your brain. However, many people in these countries are completely unaware that such recommendations even exist. For example, in the United Kingdom, they used to have a lot more information about this, but that's all been taken down. And now there's only one web page left that we know of that has information that says you should reduce exposure to children's brains. In the United Kingdom, there was a 2002 Steward report commissioned by the UK government called Phones and Mobile Health, and they concluded by saying there is some scientific evidence which suggests there may be biological effects and gaps in knowledge to justify a precautionary approach. The 2005 Mobile Phones and Health brochure reads, the expert group has therefore recommended that in line with the precautionary approach, the widespread use of mobile phones by children under the age of 16 should be discouraged for non-essential calls. In light of this recommendation, the UK chief medical officers strongly advise that where children and young people do use mobile phones, they should be encouraged to use for essential purposes only, keep all calls short, talking for long periods prolongs exposure and should be discouraged. The UK chief medical officers recommend that if parents want to avoid their children being subject to any possible risk that might be identified in the future, the way to do so is to exercise their choice not to let their children use mobile phones. There was a 2015 webpage that said, children are thought to be at higher risk of health implications from the use of mobile phones. This is because their skulls and cells are growing and tend to absorb radiation more easily. It is recommended that children use mobile phones only if absolutely necessary. There even was a website section on mobiles and moms-to-be, which summarized the research showing cell phones had been linked to behavioral problems in children. There was even a mobile effect on sleep webpage that had research concluding that radiofrequency radiation is associated with adverse effects on sleep quality within certain sleep stages. None of these pages exist anymore. Now there is one page that was updated in 2020, and it says, the main advice is excessive use of mobile phones by children should be discouraged. Adults should be able to make their own choices about reducing their exposure should they so wish, but be able to do this from an informed position. Now, we don't really know what that means. What is an informed position? Because Public Health England is not informing anyone of anything. And then it gives examples of how you can reduce exposure, moving the phone away from your body. But everything about sleep, about babies, about pregnancy, that is no longer anywhere on the United Kingdom web pages. However, many of these countries are informing the people about cell phone radiation with much more information. So what you're seeing here is the back of a bus in Cyprus, where they have an awareness campaign with large-scale images. To the left, you can see the translation of the Greek. It reads, "Don't irradiate me, learn how to protect me. The radiation is possibly carcinogenic." The Cyprus Children's Health and Environment Committee has one of the most comprehensive awareness campaigns, and there are translated videos on their site, which is really an excellent resource to learn about what you can do to reduce exposure to cell phone radiation.
Τα παιδιά μας εκτίθενται καθημερινά σε ένα ηλεκτρονικό νέφος, το οποίο δημιουργείται από την ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi και άλλα παρόμοια. Η ακτινοβολία αυτή, σύμφωνα με τον Παγκόσμιο Οργανισμό Υγείας, είναι πιθανώς καρκινογόνα για τον άνθρωπο. Σύμφωνα με νεότερες έρευνες, η ακτινοβολία αυτή είναι πιθανό να προκαλέσει και άλλες σοβαρές επιδράσεις στην ανάπτυξη και λειτουργία του εγκεφάλου, του αναπαραγωγικού και άλλων συστημάτων του εμβρίου και του παιδιού, να προκαλέσει καταστροφή των νευρικών κυτάρων και του DNA, διάσπαση της προσοχής, διαταραχές στη μάθηση και άλλες νευρολογικές παθήσεις. Τα παιδιά είναι πολύ ευάλωτα. Μπορούμε όμως σε σημαντικό βαθμό να τα προφυλάξουμε από ένα σοβαρό κίνδυνο. Φτάνει να μάθουμε πώς.
Αφού μας αγαπάτε, γιατί μας ακτινοβολείτε με τα Wi-Fi και τα κινητά σας τηλέφωνα? Έχουμε δικαίωμα στην υγεία και πρώτοι εσείς μπορείτε και πρέπει να μας προφυλάξετε.
Στη βάση της αρχής της προφύλαξης, το Συμβούλιο της Ευρώπης, το Ευρωκοινοβούλιο, επιστήμονες, ιατρικοί και εκπαιδευτικοί σύλλογοι στην Ευρώπη συμβουλεύουν ότι θα πρέπει να μειωθεί η έκθεση των παιδιών στην ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi, ιδίως στο σπίτι και στο σχολείο.
Η έκθεση των παιδιών σε ηλεκτρονικό νέφος εγκυμονεί κινδύνους. Η χρήση των κινητών και συσκευών Wi-Fi από παιδιά μικρότερα των 14 ετών πρέπει να αποφεύγεται. Προφυλάξτε την υγεία και το μέλλον των παιδιών σας. Το ίδιο ισχύει και για την έγκυο. Οι έφηβοι ποτέ δεν βάζουν το κινητό στο υπνοδωμάτιο τους, στις τσέπες τους, στα μπράτσα ή κοντά στο στήθος τους. Πάντα χρησιμοποιούν hands-free και κρατούν το κινητό μακριά από το σώμα τους.
Αξιοποιώ την τεχνολογία σωστά. Γνωρίζω τους κινδύνους και δεν εξαρτώμαι από αυτή. Χρησιμοποιώ ενσύρματη σύνδεση για τον υπολογιστή του σπιτιού μου και ενεργοποιώ το Wi-Fi και τα δεδομένα κινητής τηλεφωνίας μόνο όταν χρειάζεται και ποτέ όταν τα παιδιά μου είναι κοντά. Δεν χρησιμοποιώ κινητό τηλέφωνο στο αυτοκίνητο όταν τα παιδιά μου βρίσκονται σε αυτό. Η έκθεση στην ακτινοβολία είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερη. Προστατεύω πάντα τα παιδιά μου.
Η Γαλλία ήδη με νόμο απαγόρευσε τη χρήση Wi-Fi σε παιδικούς σταθμούς και σε χώρους όπου φιλοξενούνται παιδιά κάτω των 3 χρόνων. Επιτρέπει ελάχιστη χρήση στα σχολεία κάτω από αυστηρούς περιορισμούς.
Στον υπηαγωγείο, στο σχολείο και στο σπίτι περνάμε τουλάχιστον το 75% του χρόνου μας. Απαιτούμε ασφάλεια, χωρίς ακτινοβολίες από Wi-Fi, κινητά και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις. Η υγεία είναι δικαίωμα. Μην μας το στερείτε.
Δεν έχουμε το δικαίωμα να ρισκάρουμε την υγεία των παιδιών μας αναμένοντας παθητικά τους άλλους να κάνουν κάτι. Ας ξεχάσουμε τι είναι βολικό για μας και ας τους χαρίσουμε το καλύτερο δώρο, την υγεία τους, μετατρέποντας το σπίτι και το σχολείο σε όαση προστασίας.
Το σπίτι μου είναι όαση αγάπης και ασφάλειας. Σβήνω τα Wi-Fi και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις όταν δεν χρησιμοποιούνται και κυρίως όταν τα παιδιά είναι στο σπίτι και τα κλείνω πάντοτε το βράδυ. Αξιοποιώ το κουμπάκι on-off. Είναι τόσο απλό να μειώσω το χρόνο αχρίαστης έκθεσης. Επενδύω στην υγεία των παιδιών μου μακροχρόνια.
Η ζωή και το μέλλον τους είναι στα δικά μας χέρια. Δώστε στα παιδιά ένα μοναδικό δώρο ζωής, την υγεία τους.
French Polynesia also has a public health campaign with videos and brochures. They recommend that children under 14 not use cell phones. They recommend keeping Wi-Fi at a distance. And they also prohibit advertising that promotes the sale or use of a cell phone to children under 14 years old. They also have laws that ensure advertising clearly and legibly show limiting cell phone radiation to the head. Enter 5G, which means millions of new cell antennas near homes and schools. Now, Investigate Europe did an excellent series of reports on 5G industry influence and the issue of safety. You can go online to read their really well-documented investigations. They also did a short video sort of summarizing the reports.
There's a revolution on the way. It's the 5G revolution. Although some say this will be more like an experiment that will affect billions of people. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile services. The internet will be faster than ever. Downloading a high-definition movie will take mere seconds. By 2025, the European Commission is planning for all urban areas across the continent to have seamless 5G coverage. This will enable a new age in the Internet of Things. Smart driverless cars and smart hospitals, smart fridges, coffee makers, and even baby diapers. But what citizens are not told is that for this to happen, countless new antennas will be added in our neighborhoods, our workplaces, even in our homes. Are mobile communications dangerous? The scientific community is divided. Some experts maintain they are safe, others have serious concerns. In 2011, the WHO classified electromagnetic fields associated with cell phones as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And studies published in 2018 showed that when rats were exposed to such fields, it increased their risk of certain types of cancer. Even among those who believe the technology is safe, many admit that more studies are needed. And for 5G, there are almost no studies. Telecom companies themselves have noted that electromagnetic signals may pose health risks. So why are the EU Commission and our governments turning a blind eye? They cite guidelines established by transnational scientific bodies. But Investigate Europe has found that these bodies are closed clubs. People with dissenting opinions are not invited in. And a significant number of the scientists involved have received funding from companies with vested interests in the 5G rollout. There is no risk-free society. Other things we consume are also bad for our health, from alcohol to junk food. But if you don't want a hamburger, you can simply avoid hamburgers. With 5G, there is no opt-out.
There are several countries which are actually promoting cell phones, wireless, and 5G. And I'm going to play you some videos that the governments themselves have created in order to let the people know that wireless and cell phones are safe. And you can see the translations at the bottom.
Como ya sabes, las antenas buena onda son necesarias. Y ahora con las nuevas antenas súper buena onda, el servicio está mejorando.
Estas son más modernas y amigables que en el pasado.
Se integran mejor al paisaje que las rodea y necesitamos instalar más para el desarrollo integral del país.
Cada vez usamos más el celular. Con las antenas super buena onda, la calidad y la cobertura del servicio mejora enormemente. Antenas super buena onda.
Mayor y mejor comunicación para más peruanos.
Gobierno del Perú. El Perú primero.
La radio, la televisión, los celulares y tablets necesitan antenas que transmitan sus señales a través de ondas que viajan por el aire. Son antenas buena onda y pueden tener muchas formas y tamaños. Hoy, el Perú necesita colocar por lo menos 14.000 antenas más de telefonía móvil. ¿Por qué? Porque hay lugares donde la gente hasta hoy no puede comunicarse. Y porque la calidad del servicio debe mejorar para todos. ¿No nos quejamos muchas veces cuando no hay señal? Necesitamos más antenas. Sin embargo, hay quienes creen que son dañinas para la salud. En realidad, no es así. Te cuento que su nivel de potencia es menor al que genera el microondas, la licuadora y hasta un foco común. Su nivel de radiación es 500 veces menor al que recomienda la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Y si aún crees que son dañinas, debes saber que si colocamos antenas más cerca unas de otras, lo único que lograremos es reducir su potencia. Hasta la potencia de tu celular se reduce cuando no tiene que buscar señal constantemente. Con la instalación de antenas buena onda amigables con nuestra comunidad, mejoraremos la cobertura y la calidad de la comunicación. A más antenas buena onda, mejores servicios y mayor comunicación.
Now, 5G means more. There is going to be more radiation because you're going to have more cell antennas throughout neighborhoods. It's going to be more devices which are all communicating with each other and with the cell tower. I mean, more frequencies because there's going to be the same frequencies that we've used with 2G, 3G, and 4G, but they're also going to add in higher frequencies, sub-millimeter and millimeter wave frequencies, which have never been commercially used before. In addition, 5G is going to utilize new antenna systems, beamforming, and more complex signals, which again have not been adequately tested. The European Parliament commissioned a report in 2021 to look at what are the health effects of 5G and what will the health effects be if we deploy this new system. The report concludes that when it comes to the frequencies that we've been using in 2G, 3G, and 4G, and that will be used in 5G, the 450 to 6,000 megahertz, that when it comes to cancer, these signals are probably carcinogenic for humans, in particular related to gliomas and acoustic neuromas. When it comes to reproductive and developmental effects, these frequencies clearly affect male fertility and possibly male fertility too, and they may have possible adverse effects on the development of embryos, fetuses, and newborns. Over 400 scientists are calling for a moratorium on 5G in the European Union, and you can go to the 5G appeal to read that. There's also a 2020 consensus statement of United Kingdom and international medical and scientific experts signed by 3,500 medical doctors. And you can go online to read the statement at FIRE and see the list of signatories. And it states, hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific studies have demonstrated adverse biological effects occurring in response to a range of non-ionizing radiation exposures below current safety guidelines. However, emissions continue to escalate. This image is from a study published in Environmental Research that concluded mobile phone base station antennas located close to people results in highly elevated exposure levels. And they looked at the exposures from antennas mounted closer to the ground, because now with 5G, there are going to be all of these cell antennas located down, 20, 30, 40 feet from the ground, rather than up high on those big tall towers or very tall buildings as they used to be. There was a review on real-world exposure to 5G published in Toxicology Letters, which found 5G could have systemic effects as well as adverse effects to the skin and eyes. A 2017 study that looked at people who lived near cell towers, entitled Impact of Radiofrequency Radiation on DNA Damage and Antioxidants in Peripheral Blood Lymphocytes of Humans Residing in the Vicinity of Mobile Phone Base Stations, which was published in Electromagnetic Biology and Medicine, found that the higher RFR exposures to people living near mobile phone base stations was linked to changes in the blood that are consistent with biomarkers predictive of cancer. There was a 2018 study published in the American Journal of Men's Health, which found that school-aged adolescents who were exposed to higher levels of radiofrequency radiation had delayed fine and gross motor skills, spatial working memory, and attention in comparison to those exposed to lower radiofrequency radiation levels. There was a 2015 study that looked at elementary students, and they found higher type 2 diabetes in students who were exposed to higher levels of radiofrequency radiation. The Ramazzini Institute of Italy did large-scale animal studies like the National Toxicology Program did, but at much lower radiation levels to mimic what would a cell tower give off, and what are the limits for cell tower radiation. And they found that the cancers were elevated, the same kinds of cancers that were found in the National Toxicology Program study, and actually, if you could, the same kind of tumor type that are found in humans who use cell phones long-term. There was a 2021 study published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, which found higher cell tower radiofrequency radiation exposures linked to increased mortality for all cancers, including breast, cervix, lung, and esophagus cancer. And there are many, many more studies that are in the literature. Industry-funded scientists will often say, well, the majority of studies show no effect. But actually, that's not true, or maybe I'm not sure where they're getting their numbers from, because a lot of the analysis that have been done recently have shown the majority of studies show effects. The respected journal Lancet Planetary Health published an article that looked at 2,266 studies and found that most of the studies, 68.2%, demonstrated significant biological or health effects. And they conclude that this weight of scientific evidence refutes the prominent claim that the deployment of wireless technology poses no risks at the currently permitted non-thermal radiofrequency radiation exposure levels. And when they looked at radiofrequency radiation specifically, they found 89% of experimental studies that investigated oxidative stress endpoints showed significant effects. Companies can make cell phones, wireless devices, and wireless networks much safer. They do not have to be emitting radiation all the time. There are many ways that we can use technology in much safer ways and reduce our need to use Wi-Fi all the time. Now, a lot of the uses of wireless technology are actually really unhealthy, and I think we're all aware of that. We're addicted. It's like, crack cocaine, right? But the only way that companies are going to change is if we, the consumer, call on those companies, pressure those companies, use the power of a pocketbook to force them to bring safer technology to market. And that's ultimately what we have to do. We have to say, this is what we want, we're ready to buy it, and they will give us what we want. Because with all of these new cell antennas that 5G is going to bring, hundreds and thousands in our country, almost 1 million actually new small short cell towers in the United States are going to be placed. I don't know how many in the United Kingdom, but I know that we're talking about millions and millions of new cell antennas worldwide. And of course, birds perch on top of cell towers, and insects are going to be flying by. Bats, there are a lot of airborne species, and they're going to be more exposed because there's more antennas. And there was just a 3-part review published in Reviews of Environmental Health that looked at and collected all of the research on impacts to birds, bees, trees, wildlife, and concluded that 1, the levels of exposure are escalating. 2, impacts have been found in various species and at what they call vanishingly low levels, meaning at very, very low levels. And they call on governments to set regulations that protect our wildlife. Right now, the limits that we have do not protect people, but they were never even designed to protect animals. There are thousands of scientists, medical doctors, and experts recommending a halt to 5G and reducing exposure to the population. In addition, there are protests happening around the world. There are 600 cities in Italy that have signed resolutions to halt 5G because safety is not assured. There are many cities and communities where they have made it illegal to place a 5G cell tower near a school or a home. You have to put it at a distance in order to protect the people and the families living in the homes. Now, most recently, the European Citizens Initiative to change EU rules on 5G was launched. That's an initiative whereby after 1 million signatures, the Commission will have to decide on an action. And the initiative has 23 proposals for legislative change, including, which is what we've all been talking about in this world of electromagnetic fields, which is that radio frequency, electromagnetic field exposure limits be based on health and protecting against biological effects, not only heating effects, that they protect humans, children, pregnant women, patients, the elderly, people with electromagnetic sensitivity, the injured, and also the environment. In addition, they talk about the need to reduce the electricity consumption caused by digital communication technology by prioritizing wired rather than wireless solutions, because wired technology like Ethernet cords, they use much less energy compared to wireless systems. So here are some ways you can reduce exposure. Don't sleep with the phone in your bed or near your head. And that's a recommendation of the California Department of Health. The Athens Medical Association has recommendations on how to reduce exposure, and they explain that you can disable Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and data options from your cell phone and other mobile devices when not needed. In other words, turn off the wireless devices when not in use. I mean, why have them on radiating all the time? Plus, it drains your battery. The Vienna Medical Association has some excellent recommendations on reducing exposure to cell phone radiation, and they explain fewer apps means less radiation. Minimize the number of apps and disable the most unnecessary background services on your smartphone. Because remember that apps are always uploading and downloading, and every time they do that, that's radiation pulsing through the air going into your body. So you want to turn off those apps or set them so that they only upload when you choose for them to do so instead of all the time. Please keep the cell phone out of your pants pocket, your jeans pocket, your spandex pants, your front shirt pocket, and make the bra a no cell phone zone. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends if you plan to watch a movie on your device, download it first, then switch to airplane mode while you watch it in order to avoid unnecessary radiation exposure. In 2019, French government regulations stipulated that when you buy a phone, the consumer is informed to use the equipment in good reception conditions to reduce radiation. And let me explain what that means. What that means is that when you have one bar and you're in a low service area, that would be a poor reception area, you can receive much higher amount of radiation into your body. And because the low signal forces the cell phone to emit more radiation in order to reach the cell tower. So if you're in a basement, if you're in a traveling vehicle, if you're out in a rural area and you have just one bar, or you're inside your home, that is when the phone is going to be pumping out a lot of radiation. So you want to reduce your use in situations like that. The French government also recommends use a hands-free kit or loudspeaker, speakerphone. Children and adolescents should limit calls. Keep the radio equipment away from the stomachs of pregnant women and adolescents. In Belgium, they've actually banned the sale of phones designed for children under 7 and banned advertising cell phones to this age group as well, specifically because of the radiation. This is my computer. I gave this talk on a laptop with the Wi-Fi off, but the internet was on, and I connected the computer to the internet using an Ethernet cord so that the radiation goes through the cord and not through my body. So I hope you will learn more about this issue, ask questions, be curious, and question everything.